What is going on YouTube? History Hattori here, bringing you the pilot of Age of Empires 2, a history analysis. In this series, I will be looking at the various campaigns Age of Empires 2 has to offer, their historical context, and how it compares to the real world. This is going to be a long video, so I left some timestamps in the description below if you cannot dedicate the entire time to the video, or if you want to skip ahead to the parts that you're most interested in. Without further ado, let us begin. For those of you who are unfamiliar or need a refresher, Age of Empires 2 is known as an RTS or a real-time strategy game set in the medieval ages. You have a top-down perspective as you control an entire civilization using villagers and soldiers. You collect resources, build structure, and your empire from the ground up, and use your units to conquer your opponent. It's a really fun game if you're into managing small armies and civilizations, also bringing out your inner Roman, Persian, English, or any other big empire that was prevalent at that time. At the time of this recording, the price of this game is currently going for $20 on Steam, which includes the base game alongside its first expansion, The Conquerors. The Conquerors adds in additional campaign missions and new civilization you can play as that does not come with the original Age of Kings version. For a $20 deal, you're essentially getting 2 games for the price of 1. If that still isn't enough, or you want to expand your civilization pool, this game has other expansions that does exactly that. Also, it adds additional campaign missions as well, all for $10 each. These expansions include Rise of the Rajas, the Forgotten Empires, and the African Kingdoms. If the price seems too high for the DLC currently, you can always buy it at a bundle at a discounted price, or wait for individual Steam sales which lower the prices of the DLCs. As a quick disclaimer, I am not being paid to promote this product. Personally, I've always had a fondness when it came to this game. Ever since I was younger, I would watch my dad play it all the time, and it intrigued me, being able to control my own army and see how it felt like to be the great empires that I would always read about in school. Once I was old enough to be able to play the game, I would spend countless hours playing the campaign missions, or playing against the bots on different maps and scenarios. These scenarios would be like the Spanish invasion of Mesoamerica, the fall of the Roman Empire, the siege of the Great Wall of China, etc. So I was really excited to learn that the game was being transferred over to Steam. Needless to say, I highly recommend this game for everyone, especially if you're a fan of strategy games. When it comes to Age of Empires, one of the core mechanics of this game is the different civilizations that you can play. At the moment, there are currently 31 different civilizations you can choose from, provided you have all the DLC. Otherwise, you only have the base 18. Each civilization is completely different from the rest, offering different passive bonuses and special unique units that are only available to your civilization. This makes for different playstyles depending on which civilization you pick. For example, the Byzantines, one of my favorite civilizations, gain increasing building hit points as the game goes on. They spend less resources on specific units and technologies that help them advance to later game states faster. Also, their unique powerful unit, which is a cavalry unit, does AoE damage provided you research the unique technology offered only to the Byzantines. This of course is only one example and is also very extremely simplistic. If you want a more in-depth look on different civilizations, I suggest you watch Spirit of the Law's videos. He offers in-depth analysis of each civilization, their bonuses, pros and cons, and other general strategies. He also looks at other gameplay mechanics as well. Link to his channel in the description. An interesting aspect of Age of Empires 2 is that it takes real historical figures and based their campaign missions around their exploits and accomplishments. The first campaign, which is also known as the tutorial, is set around William Wallace, his 2 famous battles, the battles of Falkirk and the Battle of Stirling. The way I'll present this is I'll look at how Age of Empires presents the information and then compare how close it resembles real life events, adding any missing or important information. Before I move ahead, there's one thing I will mention. This analysis is by no means a way to criticize the game itself or bring it negative light. I understand video games can take creative freedoms in how it presents itself. This is more of a fun project to see how the game handled the source material and the reflection to real life. Also, hopefully you'll have learned something by the end. The William Wallace campaign starts off with the plight of the Scottish people and how they are being oppressed by Edward Longshanks, the King of England. Everything seems bleak and hopeless, as it seems that the Scottish have no chance in facing the mighty English army in war. One man, however, stands up and helps lead the demoralized Scottish people, William Wallace. Nothing of note happens during the first half of the campaign, as you are being led essentially through the basic mechanics of the game: how to march, gather resources, and how to craft buildings and make an army. In the 4th mission, Edward's forces invade and destroy the city of Perth. Edward then obtains the Stone of Scone, which he uses to declare himself King of Scotland. The Scottish then set their eyes on Stirling, where the first major battle commences. In the campaign, you lead small forces south of the Stirling Bridge to destroy a small encampment of soldiers and their tower. After the successful mission, you hear the tale of a man and his army, how he held the North Stirling Bridge against the English army. The man's name was, of course, William Wallace. King Edward labels William a traitor and criminal, but this infamy and recognition gives him and his army renewed vigor. With a huge bolster in morale and confidence, the Scottish army prepare for the next big battle. Before this, however, the Scottish scour the land for 3 sacred relics to boost the army's morale even further. Then they take their fight to Falkirk. At Falkirk, the Scottish forces set up a base north of it. They reinforce the defenses and construct siege weapons while they wait for the arrival of William Wallace. Once the defenses are fully built, Wallace arrives by ship on the Burn River and leads his troops across the river into Falkirk and sieges the English encampment. The Scottish quickly overwhelm the English and siege Falkirk Castle. They topple it to build a new Scottish one in its place. With the confidence that the Scottish can fight back against the English, William Wallace, commanding the Scottish army, sets his eyes on King Edward Longshanks. And that's where the tutorial campaign ends. But before we move on to the actual historical aspects, I must give some background information to fully give the story and motivations behind the involved parties. This campaign is loosely based around the First Scottish War of Independence, which started after the death of King Alexander III on March 19th of 1286. Alexander III had 2 sons who had died before him and a daughter who died during childbirth. After his death, it was rumored that his wife, Queen Yolande, was pregnant. However, either because the claims were false or the child had died during birth, with no immediate heir to take on the Scottish crown, it would go to Alexander's granddaughter, Margaret, the Maid of Norway. This action, however, would further complicate matters, as Margaret was only 3 at the time and needed help to rule. Alongside, there was debate if she were to take up the crown, which royal line would she marry. The issue here was that she married a foreign prince, it would threaten the independence of Scotland. However, if she married a Scottish noble, it could lead to a civil war. In response, 6 lords of Scotland, who were elected at a parliament known as the 6 Guardians, were created. Their task was to figure out what to do. Scotland was falling in disarray with no clear heir, the only heir currently in Norway and only an infant. Worry also arose if Scotland would be ruled by a foreign nation or plunge into a civil war. The Guardians then came up with the following solutions. They would be appointed to rule Scotland while Margaret was being transported from Norway. They will also appoint her a regent to rule until Margaret was old enough to do it on her own. Finally, their last task was to find a suitable husband. Fortunately, Alexander had seemingly good relations with King Edward Longshanks I of England, and after hearing of Alexander's death, Edward wanted to get involved with Scotland's affairs and offered to help by suggesting to the Guardians that his son, also named Edward, would be married to Margaret. Thus, a treaty was struck, named the Treaty of Berkham. It would state that Edward II would marry future Queen Margaret, Maid of Norway. Scotland would remain an independent country by having each ruler rule over their respective country without giving up freedoms to either. Also, Margaret would be moved to King Edward I's homeland and be under his custody until Scotland was deemed safe, as the tension of the power struggle made the country unsafe. This treaty would prove to be worthless, however, as on September 26, 1290, Margaret fell ill on a voyage to Scotland and died before the marriage could take place. Once again, Scotland was on the verge of civil war as their last heir to the throne dead. The nobles were once again fighting amongst themselves as to who would be the rightful ruler. In an act of desperation, King Edward I was invited to Scotland to arbitrate. King Edward agreed, however, he insisted that he would be recognized as Lord Paramount of Scotland. Using his new title, along with that of King, in November of 1291, he recognized John Balliol as the ruler of Scotland. This was, of course, all according to King Edward's plan. It didn't matter to him who was King of Scotland. Now that he was recognized as paramount, alongside his king status, he went on to abuse and impose his powers and rules upon the Scottish people. He overturned laws and rulings made by Scottish nobles, kept taxes, and demanded that the Scottish army dedicate resources in fighting England's war against France. In addition, John Balliol was a weak ruler. He let King Edward do as he pleased, including taking the castle in which he was declared king, Berwick-upon-Tweed. In an act of rebellion, Scotland signed the Auld Alliance with France, considering Scotland and France allies and essentially declaring war on England. Edward's response was brutal and swift. His army stormed Berwick, taking over the city quickly, slaughtering its citizens, men, women, and children alike. Continuing onward, Edward's army crushed the Scottish at the Battle of Dunbar. It was speculated that there was but one casualty, and it ended with the Scottish army's immediate surrender. Edward's army finally stormed the heart of Scotland, where King John was forced to surrender. He then was taken to Stracathro churchyard. There, he was stripped of his crown and his insignia ripped from his coat. Then, he was taken to England along with other Scottish nobles and imprisoned. John's continued incompetence earned him the title of Tomb Tabard, or an empty coat, due to his stripping of power at Stracathro. Edward was not done yet, however. He went on to secure the Stone of Scone, a Scottish artifact used to inaugurate royalty, the crown of former King John, and the Black Rood of St. Margaret, the Scots' holiest of relics, for it was believed to be a piece of the true cross. With most of Scotland now under English rule, two men would rise up and start the Scottish Revolution: Andrew Murray and William Wallace. Since the campaign is based around him, we will focus more on William Wallace. According to historians, not much is known about William Wallace prior to the Scottish Revolution. His claim to fame and notoriety happened when he assassinated William de Heselrigg, the English sheriff at Lanark. This act of rebellion ignited a movement in the Scottish people, and soon they started to rally to him. With his own forces following him, William led them to retake Scone and Castle of Dundee, after which he met up with the forces of Murray. With their combined forces, they then turned to Stirling Bridge. Some of you may recognize the Battle of Stirling from the movie Braveheart, where William Wallace delivers his famous speech, declines the terms of surrender that the English had set for him, and then mounts an attack towards the heavily armored and militarily superior English army. This attack catches the English off guard and are overwhelmed by the Scottish forces, leading to their grand victory. This, however, is unfortunately mostly false. A great movie scene, but false. The victory is all factual, but the location, a hilly, grassy field, is incorrect. The actual Battle of Stirling took place near marshy land near Stirling Bridge. The English forces had a massive army that had to cross Stirling Bridge, few at a time, in order to meet Wallace's army. However, Wallace ordered an attack before the entirety of the English army could meet up on the other side of the bridge. The English responded by sending their cavalry in, a mistake that proved to be fatal, as Wallace's spearmen sprinted down a hill to meet the charging cavalry. The spearmen made quick work of the English cavalry units, thus gaining the momentum. They then charged at the infantry, forcing them back towards the bridge. Chaos ensued as English troops tried to retreat as more tried to cross. Some had to throw themselves into the river and attempt to cross the bridge that way. Others attempted to push back, but were slain by the Scottish. In no time at all, the Scottish army had gained control of the eastern side of the bridge. The English still had vast superior numbers, and they also held Stirling Bridge on the other side. One simple regroup, holding the opposite side of the bridge, could turn the tide for the English. But the skirmish had diminished their confidence, seeing a third of the initial forces lost in the first encounter. They called for a retreat and the destruction of the bridge, leaving all remaining forces on the other side to the fate of their enemies. This was a major victory for the Scottish army, and a huge embarrassment for the English. William Wallace's fame grew in this battle, and it helped bolster the confidence of the Scottish army, so much so that they retook some of their cities back, and even small forces tried mounting small raids on English land, though they were repelled. Infuriated that the Scottish rebellion had not been stopped out and quelled, King Edward I would lead the attack against the Scottish army 1 year later, after his war with France. In the summer of 1298, Edward was preparing to march towards Scotland for his second invasion, attempting to force Wallace into fighting him directly. However, Wallace avoided battle as much as he could, employing scorched earth tactics, attempting to cut off any relief or resources that may come to the English in hopes of forcing them to turn around and leave. With supplies sparsely coming in, Edward was about to call for the retreat until he received word of the location of Wallace's army, 7 miles away from his, near Stirling. Now, Wallace had no choice but to fight, with the English knowing his location, also being near Stirling where he had once won before. He owed it to his name, Guardian of Scotland, to meet and defeat the English once more. Both armies met, with King Edward leading his 15,000 men to Wallace's 6,000. The first move was by Edward. He sent in his cavalry to meet the Scottish army. The 1st Battalion was sent in to flank the Scottish. However, after their defeat at Stirling, they were very wary of the Scottish spearmen. Also, the land was unsuitable for cavalry as it was very boggy and unstable. The 2nd Battalion sent their infantry forces left to try to outflank the Scottish army, but refused to send in the cavalry due to the land conditions and spearmen. A deputy, however, opposed these orders and sent his cavalry forward towards the middle. Despite the unfavorable conditions for the cavalry, it seems that presence alone was enough to scare the Scottish cavalry into retreating without engaging. This still came at a cost, however, since the slow reaction and speed allowed the spears to pack in together densely, preventing any cavalry passage through the middle of the army. So instead, the English cavalry opted to attack the Scottish archers, who were no longer protected by their own cavalry. Seeing no progress, King Edward grew tired and ordered the retreat of his cavalry units. He then advanced his archers forward and ordered to fire arrows into the packed infantry. This was devastating to the Scottish army, as they were badly armed to deal with the hail of arrows raining down upon them. The line of spears that the Scottish army once had been thin, making room for the English cavalry, now regrouped, to ride in and cut them down. This devastated Wallace's army, and his army now in shatters, he had to flee the battlefield, making the Battle of Falkirk a crushing loss for Scotland. No longer charge of an army and reputation in ruins, Wallace would then spend the next several years mounting skirmishes against the English until his capture in 1305. He was then given a show trial for his crime against England, then drawn and quartered as punishment. For those who don't know what drawn and quartered means, it was a common punishment to those who were deemed traitors of England. An individual would be dragged across the land by horse to the location of their execution. There, they would be hung to death or near death, be taken down and placed on a table where they would tie up the victim and remove their intestines and sex organs, all while they were still alive as well. These organs would then be prepared in a fire. Finally, the head would be chopped off and the body cut up into 4 pieces where they would be mounted on stakes in various parts of a city. For Wallace, his head was displayed on London Bridge, while the rest of his body would be displayed in Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. Well, how is that for comparisons? A big contrast between the game's version of history and real life. Although, it makes sense why the campaign was written this way. The game wants you to feel like the victor, like you played a part in taking down the English as the Scottish. However, if they added a few extra missions, including the fall of Falkirk, but continuing the legacy with Robert the Bruce, King of Scotland, who took inspiration from Wallace's fighting and went on to fight for the Scottish independence, unlike in Braveheart where he's discovered betraying Wallace, this would help by giving it closer historical accuracy. But this is my opinion, however, and is perfectly fine as is, serving as the game's tutorial mission. Well, that about wraps things up. Did the real-life version of William Wallace and his 2 battles surprise you? What about his fate or the events leading up to his uprising? If you are interested in the game, I will leave a link to the Steam store page in the description, along with the links to the mods I used for those wondering why my game looked different. I highly implore everyone to check the game out and try it for yourselves. But what did you think of this video? I am completely new to the YouTube scene in terms of making videos, so all types of feedback is welcome and appreciated. If there's something big or important that I missed out, or maybe got wrong, leave a comment down below letting me know. More than anything, I hope everyone watching enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed making it, and that you learned something today. A like letting me know that you enjoyed it would be greatly appreciated. Also, keep an eye out, for next I'll be tackling Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans. This is History Hattori, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.